Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and Jon Chai.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. And today is Tuesday, so it is a tactical day. And I am joined by my co-host, as always, minus the first 20 episodes of Tactical Tuesday or so, Mr. Jonathan Chai. How you doing, sir?
Doing good. How are you, Brad?
Doing quite well. Can't complain. Feeling better. I'm mostly recovered from the COVID and went to train jiu-jitsu for the first time in weeks. It went horribly, but, you know, I'm alive. So I did go through it. Now it's just a matter of, you know, getting back to full powers, which I think is just going to take some time.
Oh, you sound better. That's good.
Thank you. I feel better. So, what's the theme for today? Do we have a theme? Maybe the theme for the YouTube listeners that you keep messing with your camera over and over again.
Sorry about that. So the theme this week is actually two themes. It's going to be pocket fours, and they both happen to be in multi-way pots. So originally my theme was just going to be multi-way pots, and then I looked at the two interesting hands that I wanted to do, and they both happen to be pocket fours. So happy coincidence.
Nice. That's lucky.
Or maybe I just suck at playing pocket fours multi-way. I don't know.
Not another king queen off debacle. At least you know, combinatorically, you get them, you know, only half as often as king queen off, so won't bring your win rate down too much. So this first one, let's just dive into the action. You can break it down for the podcast listener.
Yeah. So kind of a interesting start to the hand from the beginning. We got a fish under the gun with a 26 big blind stack. Starts out with a limp. I'm on the button with pocket fours. We can talk about like whether you would ISO here versus overlimping. I decide to overlimp.
I would overlimp facing a UTG limper. So the limper has 26 big blinds. It's 5-10 no limit. So yeah, I think that, you know, if you ISO and get jammed on, it's kind of a disaster. Overlimping, there's just not many bad things that can happen. You know, the small blind here is ISOing to 8 big blinds. And I think this could actually like be the catalyst to maybe the worst thing that could happen, which would be you overlimp, they ISO to 8, and the limper jams for their 26 bigs, and then you have to fold your fours. And then, you know, the result of like the disaster scenario is like -1 big blind. So not ultra disastrous. So yeah, I'm definitely on board with the overlimp. It's my preferred action here, with probably deuces through sevens, something like that.
So that's what I go ahead and do. The small blind does ISO to $80, 8 big blinds. The fish under the gun comes along, and obviously we are along for the ride as well.
Yeah, and you know, this scenario is pretty good, right? Like, oh, great, we get to realize equity, we get to play a pot in position, multi-way, and there's going to be a huge amount of information reveal from the small blind, depending on like their flop action. I think that the way that this hand is kind of shaping up is that, so there's 25 bigs in the pot. The under the gun fish only has 18 bigs behind. So now the small blind, you know, they're kind of handcuffed in what they get to do. I mean, probably their best strat would be to check range, just because it is exceptionally difficult to manage both a betting and a checking range here in this situation. But yeah, it's not great for the small blind.
Small blind does check. Small blind is a reg, by the way, and
sure,
didn't notice anything. You know, just seemed like a solid 6 max 5-10 reg. No other notes. He does start out with check, so that's, like you said, that's completely expected. And again,
flop is Yeah,
even more.
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Even more expected from a strong reg. The flop is 10-5 deuce two tone. Yeah, sorry. Were you gonna add anything else?
I was just going to add what the flop was.
Okay.
So, yeah, you do not flop a set. They check to you. Yeah, any consideration betting or checking here? I think that like there certainly, there's an argument that could be made for like betting something small on the flop.
Yeah. I think under the gun checking, the fish under the gun checking is pretty meaningful, but like you said, I would expect the small blind to be checking close to range. Very likely just their entire range here. So I think betting fours on the flop would purely be for protection. Maybe we could get called by a worse hand from the under the gun player. But I doubt we're ever getting called by worse from the small blind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Small blind could check call a small bet with like ace king,
Sure.
or maybe some kind of like backdoor heart type hand that makes sense. But anyway, so the flop checks through. The turn is a 7 of diamonds, so the board is 10-5 deuce 7 now. Flush draw available, and the small blind checks again. I imagine that the double check is a lot more meaningful than the flop check. Whereas, they can check range on the flop. I think they're definitely going to be splitting on the turn and have, bets and checks. So this check, super meaningful. Now the under the gun player that had 18 big blinds bets $10, which is one big blind in this spot. So they bet 1/25th pot.
So what, we kind of blew it here, but like, just thoughts facing the one big blind.
You have to continue. That's really my thought. It doesn't appear as if like, you just have to continue. I think it's interesting. So I see your action here. You raised to 3 big blinds, so they bet 1. You raised to 3. I think that's pretty clever. Multi-way. When the under the gun player bets 1 big, it's pretty meaningful. Like I think that they typically going to choose a bigger size with a 10, probably even a bigger size with a 7. Although, it's kind of hard to say always what they do or what they're doing when they bet, 1/25th pot. But it's a 3 big blind investment. If the under the gun player jams, I guess you can just fold. Puts more pressure on the small blind to continue, with their overcards, which they almost certainly would, getting, 27-1 on their money, because now the action's still open and it just becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate. I would still say that the small blinds,
they're still getting 29-1.
Ace king and ace queen, they're getting 9.67 to 1.
Yeah.
So I think that like their overcards can still call, and probably should, like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, certainly. Any draw is obviously a slam dunk. Just the queen jack highs, king queen highs, those probably should just call. Honestly, I think
those hands should call versus this size. I think one of the kind of the cool things about this size, though, it sort of looks like I'm threatening stacks versus under the gun, where I'm like doing something to, try to get it in on the river or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so like, what I was hoping is that the reg in the small blind starts thinking about whether ace king ever improves, when ace king improves, does it even ever improve to a hand that is going to beat mine? Because it just sort of just looks like I could easily have like a 2 pair plus range here, and I'm just desperately trying to get it in versus under the gun.
Yeah. You could go to 5 big blinds probably, and I think it still kind of works almost like the same, except it puts a little bit more pressure on the small blind. But now I'm starting to have trouble folding to the jam when under the gun jams over my raise once I start making it 5. Yeah, well, small blind does fold, which is really a great it's really a great outcome.
Yeah.
Just generating a fold when they're getting like 9-1. And river pairs to 5, which is great. And the under the gun player checks, and the action's on you.
You check back here. Plan on the flop, or sorry, plan on the turn with the raise wasn't to try to get under the gun to fold a better hand, but to try to get the small blind to fold out a bunch of equity and hopefully get called by some worse hands from under the gun at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's great. Very well played hand. I think we're going to take this one into the break. I think it's very clever there, raising the turn, and the smaller size that you choose on the turn to raise with just actually makes it to where the villain can make a more egregious mistake by folding the smaller size that you use that they fold to, which I think is just a nice bonus.
You mean the
scenario
under the gun villain or the small blind villain?
Small blind.
Small blind villain. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because essentially you're folding out their equity, and they're getting 9-1 and deciding not to call, and that's really, really good for you. And if you used a size of 20, and they had an even better price, and they still folded out their equity, then I think 20 is probably better than 30.
Yeah.
In that sense. So yeah, let's. Any setup for the hand after the break?
No, just the reveal for this hand because we can't see the showdown since.
Oh yeah.
Or actually, maybe we can. I'm not sure. But anyways, it goes check. And it just ended up kind of just being a dream scenario where, yeah, under the gun shows up with 8-9 that bricks on the river. The final board is 10-5 deuce 7-5. So under the gun turns an open ender, calls the small raise, bricks the river, and the small blind ended up folding ace king of clubs. So it was just perfect.
Perfect. Yep. Great. Well played hand. Let's see if you can keep it up after the break. Stick around.
Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.
All right. Welcome back from the break. And as you can see, we have Easy Hand Replayer up, which can only mean one thing, that this hand occurred in the live streets. So, yeah, let's set up hand number 2, Mr. Chai.
So hand number 2 is not only is it a live hand, but it is a bomb pot.
All right.
We are playing a $50 bomb pot, 8 ways. I have pocket fours. Again, as previously mentioned, I'm in the low jack. So pre-flop action, in case you're not familiar with bomb pots, is everybody puts in $50. There's no action pre-flop. We go straight to the flop, and then action starts in the small blind.
All right. So I'm guessing pre-flop action here, and the Easy Hand Replayer is pretty easy. You get a pretty good flop. Jack 4 tray, which is the second nuts.
I actually couldn't believe it. So like what I do in bomb pots, and this is just like my personal fun sweat method, is like I look at the flop and then I like kind of like peel my cards one at a time after looking at the flop. And I saw the first 4, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then I saw the second 4 in my hand, and I was like, wow, I can't believe it. I flopped a set in a bomb pot. This is gonna be amazing.
I believe it. Like, just having a set here is like just especially so good when like all the 2 pairs are available. Like, just it just really great scenario. So there's 400 in the middle. 8 of you.
I guess for a little bit of context, so we were doing bomb pots every dealer change, and the bomb pot right before this, I went bet and showed down a bluff on the river.
Which means it didn't go through.
No, it did go through.
Oh, it did go through, and you showed a bluff?
I got asked to show it.
Oh, that's very courteous of you to just, sure.
I feel like that works like 90% of the time when I'm bluffing. If someone asks me to show it, maybe it's partly because like I'm sort of looking for a reason to show it, and I don't want to do it on my own without like some sort of encouragement from somebody else. It just feels like it's a little needly or a little rude to just like flip over a bluff for no reason. But as soon as someone asks you or kind of nudges you a little bit, I'm like excited to do it.
No, man, this guy.
So, anyways,
Well,
that just is the context for the last hand. I don't know if anyone was reading into that, but here we are, Jack 4-3 two-tone. We're $5,000 effective with $400 in the middle. Everybody's
All right.
checked to me.
and you bet a quarter.
Yep.
So you bet 100. Hijack calls, cutoff calls. Everybody else does the folding thing. The turn is the king of hearts. So king jack 4-3, 4-3 of spades. There's 700 in the middle.
You want to talk about flop sizing first? So like part of the reason I gave the context of the previous hand is that my flop and turn sizes in this hand were exactly the same as my flop and turn sizes in the hand where I showed down the bluff on the river. I'll be honest, I was tempted to bet bigger on the flop because I bet quarter pot here on a very wet board with a set in a spot where I'm pretty sure top pair is going to call more than quarter.
Yeah.
All the draws are going to call more than quarter, and you're probably not getting raised as frequently by the draws in a bomb pot as you would in a normal pot. Like I could see like some of the weaker combo draws, like maybe not raising, like a 7-5 of spades or something like that, like not being like that really excited about putting in $5,000.
Was it worth it? Was it worth it?
Betting small?
No, showing your bluff in the other hand that made you feel handcuffed to betting small since the last time you showed a bluff and felt like you had to bet small.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. Like that's what I'm asking though. Is like that's how I felt.
It's probably not worth it.
Do you think that that's true? Like when you're playing,
I think you could just bet half here.
Yeah.
And I think you probably should. I think you should size up when you have a set on a board like this. Like I just think, yeah, you should. They're gonna call way too often, way too more frequently than they should. I actually think that like you showing the bluff the last time is kind of enough to
just start betting bigger.
They're gonna have to like read into like your previous sizing and the fact that you had a bluff. Most likely, they're just going to remember that you had a bluff and not really consider the sizing as much as they probably ought to. Sure. So yeah, I think that you should just bet a size that you're incentivized to bet with the hand that's in front of you, and that size is probably half in this scenario. So back to the turn here. There's 700 in the middle. John's got 4850. Yeah, so quite a bit of depth. King Jack 4-3 is the board. You have to bet. Man, what an interesting spot. I guess I'll get your thoughts here before I chime in, because pretty complicated, I think.
I think I have to bet, given how dynamic the board is. I expect both, or at least one, if not both, the players behind me to, have at least some sort of made hand or some sort of very strong equity-driven, semi-bluff type of hand, some sort of, strong draw on the flop. So no shortage of hands to get called by. No shortage of bluffs for me to rep myself on Jack 4-3 two-tone. I think probably especially true after showing down a bluff 30 minutes ago. So yeah, I just decided to keep betting here, mostly just trying to get called by.
Sizing is more, I think, the bigger question here.
Yeah. So again, I use the same size that I used in the previous bomb pot. So I just pot it here. I make it 700. Would leave me about 2x pot behind if I get called. I do not get called though. Yeah.
You get the old raisy daisy, huh? So you bet 700. They raise to 2K, and now you're essentially playing for stacks. Anything about hijack?
Yeah. Reg, solid reg. What makes me really sick here is that I think the hijack is a good enough player to not do this with King Jack. Definitely not doing it with worst two pair. And what really makes me sick about this hand is that I'm willing to bet a lot of money that he doesn't do it with King Jack.
Trays. What about trays?
Oh, for sure, trays. Yeah, I would expect trays to be in there, jacks to be in there, and kings to be in there.
Mhm.
Jacks and trays feel a little weird. Like, man, would those two hands not raise the flop facing a quarter on a super wet board? Ugh. I think
Yeah.
kings could be in there too. I don't know for sure that he continues with kings facing a quarter on the flop, but
You have to. What do you mean?
yeah, I mean, I would assume he does. So yeah, I think kings is in there.
Yeah, kings is in there. Probably in full.
Okay.
No sort of data points or anything like regarding their flop call.
Not much about the flop call. The turn raise came pretty quickly though.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, this is kind of a shit spot, honestly. Like, this is if you can eliminate two pair, that's kind of important.
Yeah.
And so then we reduce trays a little bit because they're going to raise the flop at some frequency. I think we can agree on that. Jacks, we can probably reduce that some because they raise the flop at some frequency, although probably more likely to raise trays than jacks, I think. Kings probably there in full, and they have no two pair. I would be very surprised if they have a hand like queen 10 of spades or ace 10 of spades or ace queen of spades or ace deuce, ace 5 of spades or 5 6 of spades, just because they're just disastrous things that can happen when they reopen the action on the turn and you bet pot three ways.
Yep.
So I think like those draws, I would be surprised. Maybe they're in there at some frequency, but probably quite removed.
I would be surprised too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're probably just going to call the turn and kind of play rivers accordingly, I think. I think jamming doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Does it boil down to like can we just assume they have full combos of pocket threes, pocket jacks, and pocket kings, and two out of those three
Beat you.
us, and is that it? Can we just like simplify this whole spot down to that?
Probably. I think so. Just because of the nature of it being this 8-way bomb pot. Like that really allows us to remove just a lot of hands and like hand read exceptionally well here.
Yeah.
I think jamming is not good.
What about folding?
Well, I mean, I think folding is God.
Can I throw in one more argument for folding?
Sure.
So we talked about like I don't think you would do this with King Jack.
Yeah.
I think if we could take that one step further, and I would give this red credit for being able to do that. I don't know if they do it with threes.
Threes beat King Jack, Like that's the kind of like trays beats two pair, and that makes it significantly better. Like so trays beats two pair and it doesn't block any of the higher cards, whereas top two pair doesn't beat any of the sets and blocks a lot of the two pair that they can get called by. So I think that the two hands are quite different in the way that they operate. It's 1300. You're basically calling 1300 to win 34 right now, and then have to make another decision on the river. And 13, that's 47. River is going to be like a jam for half pot. So when they jam, for half pot, you need to win 25% of the time. If they have trays, kings and jacks, then you're going to win, a third of the time, which means you probably just have to call down. And then occasionally if you run into like a king jack or whatever, then it makes, makes a spot better. But yeah, I wouldn't jam the turn. I think jamming the turn is just probably a big mistake.
Okay, I jammed the turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just you're not pushing equity when you do this.
Yeah, I agree. I think I realized, or I mean, I think it hit me much more clearly like after I played the hand and thought through it. I think in the hand my heart was just pumping at the fact that I flopped the set in a bomb pot and
Sort of like I think there's another part of this that you missed that is actually quite important. Since I guess, as you said, you probably, if you weren't thinking about the hand, this in depth, you weren't in tune with the spot when you're playing, then it's going to be much harder to see this. But basically, if you call the turn, there are a bunch of rivers that villain doesn't get to jam on, or that they're probably going to be less likely to jam on, like probably any spade.
yeah.
They're going to be, they're just not going to jam. So like when you're not pushing equity and there's rivers that don't allow them to value jam, that incentivizes call just a ton.
Yeah. So it's like rivers that save us from getting stacked, but don't win us the pot.
Right. Exactly. Like if what we're saying is true and they have kings, sets of kings, sets of jacks, and sets of trays, well, you're not pushing equity by jamming. And when they don't place a river bet, that's really, really, really good for pocket fours because you don't want them to place another bet, basically. But in this case, you didn't want them to place a bet, but you gave them the option of doing it anyway by jamming. Ooh.
We got one of those rivers too. Man, it was like I remember, like you saying that actually like hurts more because like the cutoff is like a recreational player, right? And the river's the 5 of spades, and he's like, I would have made my flush, right? I was like,
yeah, river's a 5 of spades, so flop was tray 4 of spades, river's 5 of spades. I don't think they jam on this card.
Yeah,
I don't think they can.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Well,
I wish we could say we stacked threes, but
I don't even know it. Can't even see what they had. So
okay, yeah, we ended up running into top set on the flop set of jacks.
Jacks.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it was like, two things. Like I said, I think I was just super excited to flop a set in a bomb pot, was sort of blinded by that, and then on top of that, just like the perfect situation of like, wow, last time I was here, I had a bricked gut shot and just went bet and got to show it down and got to use the exact same sizes, and then I just potted the turn, got raised, and I was like, oh, this is, I was like doing backflips.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like this is there's this meta here, right? That kind of came into play, and like, we can't actually quantify whether or not the meta, like anybody's even thinking about the meta or where, if it even matters, right? But to us, that was like the number one thing that mattered, and we don't even know if like the other villains in the hand are even thinking about the last time that there was a bomb pot and that you went bet with like a busted gut shot, right? So yeah, it's just sort of a dangerous thing when we get too far in our own heads and start like making these assumptions that villains are prioritizing data points that we've previously exposed, like at the last dealer change. So anyway, just something to kind of bear in mind, because then you get tunnel vision, right? Of like, oh my God, I've got a set. I'm taking the same exact bluff line. It's so unbelievable. They're just going to be stacking off way lighter than normal here. And yeah, that last part of that statement could be absolutely untrue. They could just be stacking off exactly like normal and not be affected by the meta whatsoever. And you have zero shot of thinking about that or realizing that when you're just in your own world.
Yeah, and I could have made like a really bad mistake, I think, with interpreting how that works, because it's like, I think one thing that I could think about is like, if this guy saw me bluffing and thought that I was very likely to be doing the same thing since I was taking the same line using the same sizes, why would he raise a bluff catcher on the turn? Wouldn't he just let me like, bomb off and
Interestingly, if you're in your own world about the meta, like calling becomes the play on the turn.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so yeah, I don't know. I think, as you said, you flopped a set, your blood was pumping, and then you just started putting money in the pot, and that was it. Like, the level of thought process probably just wasn't.
I didn't even, yeah. It was like, it didn't hit me until like right after the hand, and I was like, fuck, that was probably a punt on the turn. Like, as the hand's happening, as the showdown happens, I'm just like, ugh, set over set, bomb pot. Like, how unlucky can I be? And then as I'm reaching for more chips, I'm like, huh, maybe that wasn't unlucky at all.
I think that, this will be the last thing for this episode, but for the listener at home, I think like that sort of sequence of thought that you have is quite natural and happens very often, of like, how unlucky can I be, right? The problem with how unlucky can I be is that you remove all responsibility for playing the hand better from yourself and put it all on, the god of poker, the luck god or goddess of poker. And to me, like, I hate that mentality personally. It's something that, like, when people say these types of things, like in live poker, I'm already like, oh, great. Like, I have an edge against you. I know I have an edge and I can quantify it, right? Because like, you're not taking responsibility for the things that happen, and you're in kind of like this like victim type mentality of like, oh, woe is me. Why does this always happen to me? Instead of striving to actually like find the next level and just see, was there anything that I could have done here in this spot that would have not allowed me to get stacked? Like, could I have played this hand better in some way? And I just think it's really important for the listener to take responsibility for the actions that you take when you're playing poker, and for the data points that you're analyzing, and for your ability to think through a hand rationally, and apply logic in your own thought process. And, the more frequently that you're saying, oh, how unlucky, oh, what a cooler, oh, it happens to me all the time. What you're saying is like, I have no interest in getting better at poker. I would rather not take responsibility for that and just blame some outside force beyond my control for how things are going. And to me, that's just weak sauce. So anyway, my last little diatribe there on that kind of, those thoughts, that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I was definitely in that mentality for a minute. Right after.
Yeah. You play too much live poker. It rubs off on you. You play too much live poker, and that sort of those thoughts.
In my defense, I realized that it was very likely a punt, within 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know that you're the type of player that will, right? I think that there's just lots of players that won't. And, it's like this weird social proof aspect of live poker, right? Like, where monkey see, monkey do. You see, like, a reg respond that way to a hand, and you think, oh, I guess that's okay to feel sorry for myself. Oh, I guess that's okay to, blame the poker gods. And you see it again and again and again and again and again and again. And then eventually you're like, well, maybe it's fine to just act like that. Why can't I, claim victim? Why can't I do that? And I think it's just an easy trap to fall into. There's so many of these like traps of like, in my head, right? Like, when I first started playing poker, I imagined that like poker professionals are professionals. They don't go to the pit. They don't like do the degen things. Because they have to know better, right? Like, this is about survival. And then you play for a while and you realize like, oh, a bunch of these guys go to the pit. Oh, a bunch of these guys like drink and play. A bunch of these guys like stay up all night, sleep for 3 hours, and then play the next day. And I think that you see that often enough, it can start tricking you into believing that like, oh, it's okay. These things, like, I was paranoid before. Like, these things are actually okay because I see all these guys doing it, so it must be okay, right? And the more that you can guard against that internally, the better. Because like, what they're actually doing is giving you edge. They're giving you opportunity, and you can either do the shit that they do and throw away that edge and opportunity, or you could just be a pro and not do that kind of thing. So, all right. I said my last rant was my last. This rant is actually my last rant here for the end of Tactical Tuesday. But it's a really important thing, and it's relevant to anybody that plays live poker for any significant period of time. These kind of things, they seep in unconsciously, and you don't always realize that you're falling into that trap.
Yeah, I totally agree. And
Cool.
on that note, we'll have to put the Hero Folds episode off for another week, I guess. Definitely didn't happen this time.
Not today. Not today, sir. All right. Well, tough hand number 2. I think that's a tough one. And in your defense, I think that almost everyone goes broke there on the turn. So,
well, good thing I played like the $200 pot really well in hand 1. That makes up for this one, right?
Absolutely. Every time.
All right.
Well,
see you next week.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Thanks for listening to Chasing Poker Greatness. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com to get the newsletter, join the Greatness Village community, book a coaching session, or dive into the latest data-driven poker courses. Follow the show on Twitter @CPG Podcast.